Okay, so today we're just going to be going through the Witchwood expansion and reviewing pretty much every single card, literally every single card actually. If you didn't watch the live stream reveal, I recommend you go ahead and do it, especially the first match was particularly awesome. I think Witchwood as a set really came together in terms of the fun category of it at the very least. Maybe some of the cards aren't, as great as some of the previous sets, but since it is standard and new sets are rotating out, it means that there will be a lot more room for cards that are just kind of okay, rather than every card having to necessarily be top tier for standard play. So let's see here, just want to make sure everything's good. Yep. Okay, so there's 135 cards being added to the game, and I guess we'll start with Hagatha the Witch. We're basically just going down hearthpwn.com right now. Hagatha the Witch is a new legendary hero or rather, I should say hero card for Shaman specifically, where as a battle cry it deals 3 damage to all minions, and then you get the hero power, which is a passive, so you can't spend mana on your hero power anymore. After you play a minion, add a random spell to your hand. It was featured in the live stream, and I think overall the performance of the card was pretty decent. It's kind of deceptive. You might think like, oh, you can't spend your hero power anymore, you might run out of stuff to do, but actually when you play a minion, especially if you have echo minions where you can maybe add 2, 3, 4 more cards to your hand, and there is a shaman specific echo murloc that we'll talk about later on, you actually do get a lot of ability to keep going forth with basically endless cards after endless cards. So a shaman control deck is a lot more realistic than it probably ever was before. I think Hagatha the Witch on its own is a playable card, but not necessarily meta defining. It would just be a good card to include if you specifically are trying to play a control shaman. But you can see the deal 3 damage to all minions also hits your own, so you probably don't want to play this in the tempo deck. The hero power also doesn't really fit tempo at all. It's more of a control card, but I'm fine with that. I like the idea of control shaman a lot. I think even after the nerf, cards like Hex are still very strong in shamans, so there is the potential to have that kind of deck be a real thing. Okay, 134 cards left to go. Holy crap. Okay, Splinter Graft. We're doing Druid cards, I guess, first. It is a 8 mana, 8/8. You battle cry, choose a friendly minion, add a 10/10 copy of it to your hand that costs 10. Deceptively a little bit stronger than it might look at first glance. You might think you're just getting a 10/10, which is what you would have by default. But the trick is you have to find a good target for it. So, for instance, Bewitched Guardian down here gains +1 health for every card you have in your hand. So if you play Splinter Graft with a Bewitched Guardian and you have a full hand, you could theoretically get something like a 10 mana 10/19 taunt as a free battle cry off of this 8/8. So the idea here is Druid is being pushed really hard in the hand Druid archetype. From the live stream, it did seem like it can come together. It has a lot of value to go on for days. There's quite a few cards that can actually add cards to your hand, like the Ravencaller, which is a common available to multiple classes. So it's actually looking like it might be a thing, to be honest. Alone, Splinter Graft is just kind of okay. I think you really have to include it in a deck where it has one of these extra benefits, like, oh, when it battle cries, it can get an extra +2/+2. Because, like, adding a 10/10, like just a vanilla 10/10 to your hand is actually pretty terrible. You would never play a 10 mana 10/10 that doesn't do anything else. So it has to have some bonus effect there. No, you could put it on like a 1-cost minion or something like that, and then, that 1-cost minion would become a big minion, but really you're looking for the sick battle cries, or at least a sick death rattle effect to go along with that. Duskfallen Aviana. On each player's turn, the first card played costs 0. It's a 5 mana 3/7. I think that this card overall is going to be not very strong, because obviously you give your opponent the ability to play a card first, and if they have a big card, that could be a problem for you. You can justify it in something like a big Druid, where you might have used Splinter Graft to get a 10 mana minion, because your opponent might only have like up to a curve or 5, so you give your opponent a free 4 or 5 mana minion, and then you, in theory, as long as this lives, you get a 0-cost 10 mana minion, which would be really good and probably win you the game. That said, they can play a card for 0 and later on their turn just kill off your Duskfall and Aviana, and then basically you've just given them a couple free innovates, which is not so great. I mean, the stat line is okay in itself, but I just don't really see it being super good. It just seems way too risky, and I don't know if there's really any way to justify it. Like, is cheating out a 10-cost minion really that important that you want to risk throwing the game just to play it? I don't think so. I don't think it'll see a lot of play. So, Gloomstag, this is Taunt Battlecry if your deck has only odd cost cards, gain +2/+2. So, obviously, one of the main themes of the set is that there's the Gen Greymane and Baku the Moonlord, or whatever his name is, deck themes. Hold on just a minute. Hey? Milk tea, no bubbles, please. Probably buy some food. I'm live streaming, by the way. Okay. Yep, okay, thanks. Okay, bye. Okay, sorry about that. So anyway. Gloomstag, yeah, Gloomstag. It's basically a card you would only include in the Baku the Moonlord deck, which means you have to play 1 drops, 3 drops, 5 drops. I won't really cover this card too much, but the idea is it's good in a Baku deck and pretty much terrible everywhere else. A 5 mana 4/8 taunt is really good, but is the Baku deck good enough to play? Because you are casting away half your collection, and honestly, I'm not very enthusiastic about Baku and Gen Greymane decks anymore. I mean, getting a stronger hero power is good, but is it worth throwing away half your collection and having to play a really strange mana curve? It's kind of questionable there. And if you did see the stream, there was a Baku Mage there, which, you know, you get a 2 damage hero power for 2 mana, which sounds pretty good, but overall it really felt like the deck wasn't coming together at all, and would not be able to beat something like Q-Block, not in a million years. So we'll see, but I'm not that enthusiastic there. It completely depends on if Baku decks are good enough. Next up, Whispering Wards. So summon a 1/1 Wisp for each card in your hand. It's pretty easy for Hand Druid to actually get 7 or more cards in their hand by turn 4 if they are going kind of all in on the archetype, which would be the idea. So 1/1 Wisps, 7/1/1 Wisps, it's not exactly the same thing as a 4 mana 7/7 because they can all die very easily to Whirlwind or an Arcane Explosion, not that anyone plays that card. So it's just kind of okay. I feel like it really needs some kind of buff to go along with it. But if I'm not wrong, the Mark of the Lotus, or the 1 mana Druid card that gives all your minions +1/+1, is rotating out because that was part of the Gadget Sand set, which would have been really good with this card. But I mean, I guess all you have now is Power of the Wild, which is 2 mana to give all your minions +1/+1. Doesn't really feel like it's so overpowered that you would actually really go for that. So I don't know. Like, if you're playing Hand Druid, you do probably play it because it's 7/7 stats for 4 mana. But without cards to support it, there's nothing really game breaking about it. I guess you can play Savage Roar, to be honest, and that would be a lot of damage on the follow-up turn. Or you could play shoot, what's it called? The guy that gives all of your minions Adapt. It's a 4 mana Druid spell from Ungoro. Anyway, name doesn't matter. It can allow all of your Wisps to get a bonus effect, maybe +3 damage, maybe poisonous. So I guess with either of those cards, it could be pretty good. I'm not sure if that's good enough to make that combo work, but hey, that's the idea there. Bewitched Guardian, +1 health for each card in your hand. So if you play this with 4 cards in your hand, and I believe this card doesn't count itself, kind of like Twilight Drake doesn't count itself, then you would have a 5 mana 4/5, which is pretty terrible. So probably you have to be playing a Hand Druid deck specifically. It's basically Twilight Drake, but +1 mana for taunt, which, if you put it like that, kind of makes it sound iffy. I don't usually like paying an extra mana just to get taunt. That feels sort of on the weak side, but you know. If you're playing Hand Druid, it's probably good enough because you would definitely put Twilight Drake in it, and you would need the taunts to make up for the early game tempo loss, when you play something like Witchwood Apple to fill your hand up. And it is pretty good with Splintergraft, so it all depends on that archetype working. Good in that archetype, pretty much bad everywhere else, so we'll have to see if that deck comes together. At the end of your turn, Force Guide, sorry. 4 mana, 1/6. At the end of your turn, both players draw a card. So this could be played two different ways. One is Hand Druid, you just want to fill up your hand as much as possible. And the other is a mill archetype, which probably isn't going to be a thing because Cold Light Oracle is rotating out. The stats on this are really bad. 4 mana, 1/6. Usually you wouldn't play anything like that. And do you really want to give your opponents extra cards? So let's say you're going up against a tempo deck or something of that nature, and they're going low on cards, but then you decide to fill their hand up with a Forest Guide, and you develop a really weak board that they can just ignore. I mean, this guy can barely trade into anything, honestly. It would take a long time for a Forest Guide to get some real value, without buffs at least. So it feels like a pretty bad card overall. Maybe in wild mode it'll see some play in Mill Druid. I think it would, but in standard I'm not seeing it right now. So, Witching Hour, that's probably one of my favorite Druid cards from the set. Summon a random friendly beast that died this game. And what would be the best beast to actually get with that? That would be Tyrannitus, which is a 10 mana 12/12. So you could, theoretically, if you play just that one beast, you could get a 3 mana 12/12, can't be targeted by hero powers or spell effects. Sounds really good. But, I mean, one beast would not be really enough. I feel like you would need another big beast in there. Nothing really comes to mind at the moment. You could do like Violet Worm or something like that, but the Death Rattle minions of Violet Worm are in themselves beasts, so that would be really bad. Maybe Charging Devil Source. Yeah, okay. So 2 Charging Devil Source and a Tyrannitus. That seems like a decent base for Witching Our big beast deck. You could also try to cheat some 8-drops out with like a Silver Vanguard, but yeah, I don't know about that. It kind of needs some like play data or something to even make Silver Vanguard really worth considering. Okay, next up, Druid of the Scythe. So this is a 3 mana 2/2, but it's really a transform into a 4/2 with Rush or a 2/4 with Taunt. And if it is a 4/2 with Rush, I think it's better than just deal 4 damage to a minion, because there are actually quite a few 0 and 1 attack minions that you would see around turns 2 or 3, such as Manatide Totem, such as Stonehill Defender. And if you can kill one of those minions off, basically deal 4 to a minion, and you still are left with a 4/1 or 4/2, that's actually pretty good. So it's kill a minion and keep a minion on the board. Now, the 2/4 taunt side of it is pretty bad. I think you would only do that as a desperation play. So the idea here is you would include it in a deck, and you would hope to benefit from the fact it's a minion that can survive after doing damage, rather than just 3 mana deal 4 to a minion like Shadow Bolt. I think it's a little underrated at the moment. Might not see competitive play, but I think it's worth considering. Also, there's nothing to say you can't buff it as well. So if you have like, I don't know, give 2/2 to a minion, you can make it a 6/4 with Rush, and then it would be able to kill off a lot more without dying. And then you'd have like a 6/2 or 6/1 or a 6/3 on the board, and that sounds pretty good. Okay, Ferocious Howl. 3 mana, draw a card, gain 1 armor for each card in your hand. Probably one of the best cards in this Hand Druid archetype. So if you have a full hand, it's basically 3 mana, gain 9 armor, and then draw a card, which makes it a better shield block. Obviously, Hand Druid is going to need something to kind of stabilize its health total and not just get rushed down, so this is an auto-include in that deck for sure. If you're playing Wild, probably just Jade Druid, I think, would run something like this as well. Being able to draw a card and get a lot of armor back. I mean, really, a lot of decks could play this. It doesn't necessarily need to be a Hand Druid archetype, because when you play Ultimate Infestation, you draw 5 cards anyway, so it's very easy for Druids to actually have a full hand these days. So definitely in Hand Druid, if Hand Druid is a thing, but could just be seen in any kind of more control-y late game Druid too as well. But obviously, the bigger your hand, the better. Witchwood Apple, 2 mana, add 3 2/2 treants to your hand. So if you want to play those treants out, it becomes 8 mana for 6/6 of stats. But really, you're playing this in order to fill up your hand with just random garbage so that your other cards like Bewitched Guardian and Twilight Drake can perform better. And if you think of it that way, it's okay. But it's not really anything special. This card is pretty bad on its own because 2 mana, 2/2 treants are really not that strong. In fact, they're pretty abysmal, to be honest. So this is just for filling up your hand. And I guess you could also consider it in some kind of like board flooding buff deck, but I think you would rather just play like the 5 mana, summon 3 treants immediately rather than 8 mana and to develop the 3/3 treant, to develop all of the treants at once on like turn 8. Also, living mana is still a card, so that's way better for aggro decks, of course, as well. So this is just to fill up your hand for control decks card, and I mean, maybe you play it in hand, Druid, but aside from that, it seems pretty bad to me. Okay, Hunter, MRS, 10 mana, 8/8 dragon, double the attack and health of all minions in your hand. When people saw this, a lot of people were freaking out. I think it is solid if you can justify playing a late game control hunter, and a lot of these new cards actually kind of hint at that being more of a thing, especially with this lifesteal beast we'll talk about. It's a 2 mana 1/3 lifesteal rush beast, which if you can buff that up or put extra copies in your deck, which we'll talk about a little bit more, then Hunter can actually lifesteal its way to surviving a lot longer. So I do think MRS has some real potential this set. I always like the idea of trying out a control hunter, but it usually fails. There was one deck back in the day that had some play. It revolved around like Gazrilla and dragons, and it was kind of interesting, but not a super popular deck. We'll see how things turn out this time. Obviously, if you were going to play like Dragon Hunter and Wild, though, that would be worth considering there. Oh, especially if you can like discover more copies of it off of the Netherspite Historian. That would be pretty sick. And remember, when you discover a dragon, class dragons are 4 times the rate, I believe. So yeah, that's kind of a thing maybe, but I don't really know Wild that much because I haven't played it much in like a year. Okay, anyway, the card itself. Obviously, there's a lot of value in the card. It's just, can you survive till turn 10? And would you rather play a control hunter over just a standard rush the face down hunter, given that the hero power is still about, you know, dealing damage to the face? You could say, well, I guess you could play a Deathstalker Rexar deck, and this effect would be really good with those zombies, because the zombies are usually overstated for the mana cost, and they tend to be quite big as well, so you could make like, I don't know, some 10-15 taunts or something. Yeah, it should be a playable card. It is a good card on its own. It's just a question of if there are enough cards to support that kind of archetype. So let's move on to Houndmaster Shah. This is a 4 mana 3/6. Your other minions have Rush. I think this card is fantastic because, well, first off, it's got really good stats. Secondly, the threat of you pulling minions out on your field, which are going to be able to rush immediately, considering that there might be like some poisonous minions in a Beast Hunter's hand or something. It's just a really scary card that has to be removed, and for that reason, I think you could include it in pretty much any hunter deck. The thought of being able to gain some extra tempo, trade minions from your hand into your opponent's minions, and keep those minions alive while dominating the board sounds really good for aggro, really good for mid-range, and really good for control because they have to remove it even if they're like an aggro deck. So, sick card. I guess if we were giving it a star rating, I'd probably say 5 stars. Yeah, I think it's just really good. Okay, Toxmonger, 4 mana 2/4. Whenever you play a 1-cost minion, give it poisonous. So the idea behind this card for me is Quest Hunter, because you would play a lot of 1-cost minions there anyway. And with this kind of effect, those 1-cost minions become much bigger threats. Being able to take down 5, 6, 7, 8 cost drops, basically anything you want. And then your opponent basically has to remove your 1-cost minions and the Toxmonger because they become huge threats, which will buy you enough time to actually complete the quest. And once you have the quest complete, you know, you get the 5 mana 8/8, you get the 3/2 for 1 mana that draws a card, and you can kind of just overwhelm your opponent, I think. So I think Quest Hunter might be pretty good here with cards like this. Also, pretty good with Houndmaster Shah. I mean, think about it. You play Houndmaster Shah, and then you start charging the 1 mana 3/2 Dino draw cards, and then it's just like an endless chain of Dino. Honestly, you could do a lot of damage with that. I mean, imagine 10 mana, and then you charge 15 damage while drawing 5 extra cards. No, wait. 18 damage, 6 extra cards. That is sick. That is actually sick. Okay, next card. Rat Trap. 2 mana secret after your opponent plays 3 cards in one turn. Summon a 6/6 rat. So a 6/6 for 2 mana is obviously really good value. The question is, how long will you have to wait for this trap to go off? I kind of feel as though, because it's so hard for it to pull off and you might have to be waiting turns, this might be more like a one of in a deck, but you could say, well, if you want to be really greedy, you just put 2 into a control deck, and if your opponent tries to rush you down too fast, then you get to counter them with your 6/6 rat, and that does seem pretty good. In a aggressive deck, I don't think you would play this, because most control decks are just going to be clearing your board with like one big Dragonfire Potion or Flame Strike, and if you never get that 6/6 rat out, then this becomes a dead card. So it's more of a comeback card for control or mid-range decks, I feel like. It could see some play. I think I will try that big hunter or control hunter archetype, and I think I would definitely try Rat Trap. So I think it's playable, but the question is, how slow does your deck have to be in order to justify playing a card that's going to do nothing until you get that 6/6 out? Okay, next up, Carrion Drake, 5 mana, 3/7 dragon. Interesting, they're kind of pushing Dragon Hunter a little bit after all of those really good Dragon Priest cards have rotated out. So 5 mana, 3/7. If a minion died this turn, gain poisonous. Note that can be minion on either side. So 5 mana, 3/7 poisonous is actually really good value. A 5 mana, 3/7 alone is a pretty solid stat line, I think. Well, if you compare it to Houndmaster Shah, I guess it's a little bit on the weak side, so you do want to get that poisonous, but just playing a vanilla 5 mana 3/7 isn't bad. Definitely a good minion for trading into, you know, smaller minions kind of controlling the board, coming back in tempo. But if you get the poisonous effect off, which is very, very, very likely, then it's not only a threat to small minions, but it's also a threat to big minions. You might even be able to kill off a big minion that has like 5 attack and still have a 3/2 poisonous on board. So I think this is a pretty good control card overall. Obviously, if you want to play dragons for some reason in Hunter, which I don't think is going to be a thing, I think you would just play these for the cards themselves, not the fact that they have dragons on them, at least in standard mode. But you could try to push a Dragon Hunter. It just looked really, really bad in the stream. That said, there were 7 dragons in the deck, and none of them were ever drawn. I think... Yeah, that sounds about right. No. One was drawn, but it was played before you could get any of the, if you have a dragon in your hand, get this effect cards off. So solid minion overall for a mid-range or control deck. Wing Blast, 4 mana, deal 4 damage to a minion. If a minion died this turn, this costs 1. Really fantastic card, actually. Like, deal 4 damage to a minion for 4 mana. Cards like that have seen play almost with nothing else added onto them. I mean, I'm thinking Jade Lightning, of course, which does give you like a 1/1 when you play it as your first Jade card. But just 4 mana, deal 4 damage to a minion is usually good enough when you actually have it on curve on turn 4. Like, you actually need to kill something and that is enough damage to do it. But this becomes really good if a minion died this turn, but if you're playing control or mid-range, you're trading a lot anyway. Maybe even in an aggro deck, you trade like one of your 1/1s in so that you can get past a taunt. Like, you trade a 1/1 Hound into a Tar Creeper, and then you Wing Blast for 1 mana, and combined, those take away the Tar Creeper, allowing you to get past the defenses and deal more damage. But also really good in control, just like 4 mana, 4 damage removal for 1 mana, in theory. Sounds really, really good. I think this will fit into pretty much all Hunter decks, and probably 5-star card. Okay, next up, Dusk Haven Hunter. 3 mana, 2/5, stealth. Each turn this is in your hand, swap its attack and health. So a 5/2 with stealth is actually a lot of damage. A 2/5 with stealth is not really that useful. I think you would prefer a 2/5 taunt. So generally, you would want it as a 5/2 stealth so that you can go face and get that guaranteed 5 damage in while still having a sizable 5/2 minion on the board. I don't know if it's really good enough to run, because if you have the wrong stat line on the wrong turn, you're going to get screwed pretty hard by this Worgen card, and the benefit you get by having it swap around isn't really that great. I mean, a 5/2 stealth is okay, but it's not anything amazing. Might see some play in kind of mid-rangey decks. I don't think I would put it in a control deck because you don't care about going face ever, so it would be like half the time it's a playable 2/5 minion. It would need a deck where you actually want that kind of flexibility. Like sometimes you do want to go face and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you do just want a 2/5 that can trade into minions. So to me that says mid-range hunter, which I don't know is actually going to be a thing. Like a lot of these cards are more push and control than like your standard Savannah high main mid-range, but we will see. Decent arena card. I don't think it's really going to see much play in constructed. Next up, 5 mana, 1/3 Vile Brood Skitterer, Poisonous Rush. So effectively, if you use this minion to trade into a bigger minion, it's like a 5 mana Assassinate for hunters, which isn't bad, but it's not great either. Now, in some cases, if you're lucky enough, if it has 2 or less attack, you can kill that minion immediately, and you still have a poisonous minion on the board, which makes it better than Assassinate in that case. But how many minions are going to be played onto the board at turn 5 or later that are actually going to have 1, 2, or 0 attack? Attack. They actually care that much about killing? Not many. It does feel a little bit like a slightly mediocre card. Obviously, if you can kill something like a 2/7 or 2/7 or something like that, then that does become pretty good. You could also, like with this next card, Dire Frenzy, you could buff it up and then it becomes like a 4 mana 4/6 Poisonous Rush, which is a lot more durable and would be a lot more capable of killing off bigger minions without necessarily dying. I don't think you would play it like that though, because usually if you're killing something with poisonous to get the value, you really don't want to trade a 4/6 into it. That doesn't seem like super good value, it just seems okay. So probably my favorite hunter card of the set, Dire Frenzy, 4 mana, give a beast +3/+3, so slightly less stats than like a Blessing of Kings, but shuffle 3 copies of the beast into your deck with +3/+3, which means when you draw those, if it's like a 2 mana minion, it's now a 2 mana minion with +3/+3 stats. Also allows you to have more cards in your deck, so if for some reason you're worried about milling out or running out of value in your deck, that can keep you going. Also, if you have any minions that have low base stats but are really good with buffs, then that would be a really good card to actually go ahead and buff that with. So then you get like 4, for instance, 4 Lifesteal Rush minions that have 3 extra attack and 3 extra health, making them super good for actually getting your health back. And in fact, I'm going to scroll down here because I want to point out the card I'm talking about here with Dire Frenzy, which I think makes that card a lot better. Let's see if I can find it. That would be the Vicious Scalehide, a 2 mana 1/3 beast. It has Lifesteal and Rush. What's interesting about this card though is it's not only good in like a hunter, but because it's a neutral minion, you can play it in just about anything. So when you buff this with +3/+3 and shuffle 3 copies into your deck, it's a 2 mana 4/6 Lifesteal Rush, which is just a really insane stabilization card. You'll get so much health off of this, likely to proc twice per card. Makes control hunters seem a lot more realistic single-handedly because there's not a lot of good ways for hunter to heal. And then maybe you play Deathstalker Vexar, who knows? Okay, let's get back up there now. Man, we have a lot of cards to cover still. So, Hunting Mastiff, Echo Rush. It's a 2 mana 2/1 beast. Obviously, because it has Echo, you can play 5 copies of it in a turn. I think an interesting combo would be putting Dire Frenzy on it. I just thought of that actually, where this becomes a 2 mana 5/4 Echo Rush minion that you can draw from your deck later, and you can play up to 5 copies a turn, which seems a lot better than 2 mana 2/1 Echo Rush. So I think without Dire Frenzy, this is actually pretty terrible. Like it's like 5 mana and you can kind of deal 10 damage to minions, but meh. But with Dire Frenzy, that actually becomes 10 mana, deal 25 damage to minions, and you likely have some of those hounds left on board afterwards, which does seem really sick now that I think about that. Yeah, maybe Dire Frenzy Hunting Mastiff, I don't know. But this card alone, no, hell no, it's pretty terrible. Okay, let's do Mage, and then I think I'll take a break to actually eat breakfast here. So 6 mana Toki Time Tinkerer, it's a 6 mana 5/5, add a random legendary minion from the past. That means wild sets to your hand. It's a meme card, it's pretty terrible. A random legendary is not as good as you might think, and a 6 mana 5/5 is horrible stats. So this card, I cannot see how this could possibly see play. Like there's no synergy of a random legendary minion. and the stats here are pretty bad. Why not just play a card like Bonfire Elemental, which is a 5-mana 5/5 draw card from your deck, when you could play 1 extra minion for a random legendary minion, which is worse than drawing a card from your deck. I don't see it at all. Okay, so Archmage Arugal, 2-mana 2/2. Whenever you draw a minion, add a copy of it to your hand. If this hits the board, it's a huge threat because the mage is going to get a lot more value. It's really good with Book of Specters, which is draw 3 cards for 2 mana, discard any spells drawn. So in theory, you could do like turn 4 Archmage Arugal, Book of Specters, draw 6 cards, and your opponent will cry. But if you just play it on turn 2, your opponent has to remove it, and you could pretty easily draw an extra card from that. And 2/2 stats is not great on curve, but it's not horrible either. So you probably try to play it with Book of Specters when you can. But in a Tempo Mage or something like that, I could see this being pretty good. Hell, you could even put it into some kind of Control Mage and just wait to the later game in order to draw some extra cards. Or to copy some extra drawn cards, rather. So it seems like a really solid card. I don't know if it'll be seen in every deck. It might not even be seen in the top tier decks. But I think it's definitely a competitive choice to pick. And if hand mage, or basically minion mage, is a thing, I think you definitely play this combo Archmage Arugal, Book of Specters. Maybe just because these cards are so powerful and they combine so well with each other, you would just put these in pretty much every mage deck that's going to see play this set. So yeah, maybe it is better than I initially gave it credit for. It does seem really good though, overall. But does it fit into every single deck? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, there is a such thing as drawing cards too fast, so maybe Big Mage doesn't play it, because 2/2 is irrelevant, and then drawing 3 cards and dispelling your big spells, that could kind of suck. Okay, Arcane Keysmith, 4-mana 2/2, discover a secret, put it into the battlefield. Overall, it seems like an okay card. Kind of like a 1-mana 2/2, where you have to play it on turn 4, and then you get a free secret, which is discovered. Less good than like drawing a secret from your deck, I think. But if you compare it to Arcanologist, you have to pay 5 mana to draw the secret from your deck and to play it immediately. You do get 1 extra health, though. I feel like it's slightly weaker than Arcanologist, but Arcanologist is played in almost every mage deck right now, so this could see some play for sure. Obviously, if you discover secrets and none of those 3 secrets are good, it's going to kind of suck, but I think a lot of mage secrets are actually okay. They might not fit into the decks you're actually playing, but like Mirror Entity is not a horrible card to get. Thanks. And there are some good secrets too, like Counterspell or Explosive Runes, which you'll get a lot of the time too. So this card could see some play. Could give you some versatility in a minion-based mage deck, because you can get the secrets without actually having to put secrets into your deck, which means you can still play Book of Specters, and it works out all fine. Let's see. So, decent card, may or may not see competitive play. Bonfire Elemental, 5-mana 5/5. If you played an Elemental last turn, draw a card. Pretty much a slightly better, shoot, what do they call that guy? Servant of Kalismos, which is a neutral, discover a elemental minion if you played an elemental last turn. That's a 5-mana 4/5, a 5-mana 5/5. The 1 extra stat does matter. Drawing a card, probably better than discovering a random elemental. That said, there are some pretty good elementals you can easily discover with Mage, like, for instance, Pyros. So there could be a deck where you actually play both of those and you just go heavy into value, but maybe that's too crazy. Like, maybe you really don't need Archmage Arugal, Book of Specters, Bonfire Elemental, and the Servant of Kalismos. Maybe that's too much. But there's definitely enough cards out there right now that if you want to make the pure value minion elemental mage deck, that seems like a pretty competitive deck, actually. It's definitely worth trying. I think that will be one of the first decks I try. We'll see how it actually goes. Oh, another good thing about this guy is it's a mage elemental, so it's also another one in the pool for you to discover off of Servant of Kalismos. So Servant of Kalismos can discover this, and then you can play Bonfire Elemental, and that's just an insane amount of value. Next up, Curio Collector. 5-mana 4/4, whenever you draw a card, gain +1/+1. So there was a 4-mana 3/3 in Ungoro, where whenever your opponent draws a card, you get +1/+1, which is a decent arena card. This obviously can be comboed with cards like Book of Scepters. Specters, sorry. That seems like the obvious synergy here. So it'd be like 7 mana, 7/7, draw 3 cards. Seems pretty decent. And then they have to kill it because obviously it gets +1/+1 every turn. But outside of that, I don't think playing it with like Arcane Intellect to draw 2 cards and get a 6/6 is really so amazing. So I feel like this card really depends on you having Book of Specters in your deck. So maybe you play the Elemental version, or maybe you play a non-elemental version and you get access to other cards, maybe Arcane Keysmith and Curio Collector. Or maybe you try to cram all of them in the same deck, but I feel like you gotta cut cards somewhere. This card is only really good because of Book of Scepters, though. Book of Specters. I keep calling it Scepters for some reason. But, you know, that card might be good enough to carry this card, so we'll have to see. It's worth considering, at least. Cinderstorm, 3 mana, deal 5 damage, randomly split among all enemies. So it's pay 2 more mana to deal 2 more damage, Arcane Missiles. Seems pretty terrible. They were playing it in the stream as a odd cost deck mage spell. But that said, it really seemed very lackluster. The deck as a whole seemed lackluster. I think there are better 3 mana spells you could put in your deck. Why not just play a Explosive Runes when you could play, instead of playing Cinderstorm? Deal 6 damage to the next minion played seems way better than dealing 5 damage randomly, which can also hit face, which you may not want. Yeah, it just seems bad. I feel like this should be at least 6 damage. I don't know how you make that card work, really. Vexcrow, 4 mana, 3/3. Whenever you cast a spell, summon a random 2-cost minion. If you're playing a very fast tempo deck, something like a Flame Waker Mage from Wild, then that has some potential there. I think you have to play 2 spells for it to really get enough benefit to be worth playing, because 3/3 stats on its own is pretty weak. So, like, turn 6, Vexcrow, Arcane Missiles, and then you have a 3/3 on the board and probably, like, a couple 2/2s. But the opponent has to remove your 3/3. Seems really bad against a AoE board clear, though, which would be kind of your Nightmare Fear anyway as a tempo deck. So maybe it's not enough. Maybe it would be relying too heavily on going into minions, and what will happen is that you actually get crushed by an AoE, and then you're just very sad and lose the game. Kind of makes me feel like the just burning your opponent with spells end game plan is better than going the Vexcrow route. Like, just play Aluneth instead of playing Vexcrow. So I'm not really sure exactly how this is going to be super good. Maybe if you're going for like a late game value deck, like you add some extra copies of Mirror Images to your hand because you're playing an Archmage Antonidas deck. And then if you don't play it with Archmage Antonidas, you can get some extra value by playing it with Vexcrow. Maybe on turn 7 or 8, you play 3 low-cost minions, 3 low-cost spells, and you do get a lot of value. And then your opponent has to basically board clear. Maybe? Okay, Black Cat, 3 mana, 3/3, spell damage, +1. If your deck has only odd-cost spells, draw a card. It's obviously a really strong card. It was carrying the Baku, the Moon Eater deck, to the extent that that deck was playable at all. But if the rest of the deck has to suck, it's not really worth playing the deck just for like a 3/3 spell damage that draws you 1 card. Like, drawing a card is really good, but it's not enough to make like your deck suddenly worth playing if you have to give up half the cards in your collection. Obviously, you can't play that with things like Book of Specters, and Book of Specters is probably one of the strongest cards here in the new set for Mage. Maybe you go the other route. Maybe you do again Greymane deck and you just forego Black Cat. But that doesn't sound so great either, so, seems kind of iffy. Just because Baku the Moon Eater seems a little iffy, but maybe people can make a significantly better deck than what was shown in the live stream. Okay, next up, Snap Freeze, 2 mana, freeze a minion. If it's already frozen, destroy it. So I really like this card because there was a card before, I think it's probably rotating out, called Shatter, which was 2 mana, destroy a frozen minion. The problem with Shatter is that sometimes you don't have a freeze effect to go along with it. But this can be either the freeze effect or the shatter effect in 1 card. So it's basically a strictly better shatter because you can also use it as a freeze effect. And sometimes 2 mana to freeze a minion is actually worth it in a heavy control deck because that minion that is frozen could have hit you for 10 damage, so it's like better than Ice Barrier or even. That said, freezing a minion on its own is not really great. That would be like a defensive backup play. You want to use this to destroy a frozen minion, but the fact it has that flexibility makes it a lot better than a Shatter. And maybe you could just include some Frost Novas, some Doomsayers, a Snap Freeze. Frost Mage itself has never really been a thing, but maybe this card has a place somewhere in there because it can be played as just a simple freeze a minion. That said, the dominating control mage deck right now is obviously Big Spell Mage. That said, Ice Block's rotating out. So because Ice Block's rotating out, though, maybe control mages are going to really struggle. And even though this is better than Shatter, it's not an archetype which can even work right now. It's possible. So yeah, we'll have to see, as with all cards. But I don't think it'll see so much play right now. But it does have some potential in the future. If there's anything like a Frost deck, I think you would put this in, because the flexibility of the card does add a lot of value to it over just a simple Shatter, destroy a frozen minion effect. So obviously we have a lot more cards to go with, and I'm getting a little tired, so I'm gonna call this part 1, and I will probably be back later today to cover the rest of the cards. So thanks for watching so far, and you can see the rest of the card review on my channel, which is Dark Skeleton on YouTube, and I'll see you guys then.